from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes from Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazines. Today we've got a really terrific video for you. If you love realism, academic realism, and you want to get the complete atelier experience from start to finish, this is a video you're going to want to watch. It's realistic self-portraits with Gregory Mortenson. He teaches at one of the great academies in America, and you're going to love this segment.
Just make one little change. We're going to grab a clean rag here, and this back shoulder is kind of picking up a little bit of that light, so I'm going to put that. Okay, so, and once more, just to kind of think about our objectives here. So our objectives with this stage, in Premature Stage, is to establish a hierarchy of value. What's our darkest dark? What's our lightest light? What's everything in between? Just kind of establish that in our mind. We want to know, or kind of have a shorthand sense of volume, a sense of the form, and we want to fix any drawing problems that may have occurred, or any transfer problems that may have occurred. And I feel like I've achieved those goals so far. I could probably push it again a little bit further, but I'm happy with everything. And so we are going to move on to the next stage. But first, I think I'm going to set up my palette, and I think we'll discuss a few principles and words, the terminology that we'll be using moving forward. Okay. All right, so I have set up my palette here, and now I know upon first glance it looks like I have about 1 million colors up there, give or take. But it's not really that many. I have, along this side, I have paint straight out of the tube, but these 2 rows up here are just pre-mixed value strings, and we will talk a little bit about why I have these and why I have these colors. Before we get into that, I want to have just a little overview of Munsell. We're just going to talk for a few minutes about it, where really to get an understanding of the Munsell color system. You could take a whole semester class or a weeks-long workshop course. And so this is just, I'm going to so lightly touch on this, but just so we can understand some of the terms I'll be talking about. So the Munsell system has a lot of haters and a lot of people that just kind of live by it. And I guess we should talk about where it comes from, because it was invented by a 19th century artist, Albert Munsell. And Albert He was a prominent artist in the 19th century, and he had a prominent writer friend who approached him, and he was like, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he was like, Albert, I need you to come over to my house. I'm painting my dining room, and I can't decide what the color is that I want. It's not quite a seafoam green. It's more like a moss green, but it's not a moss green. And Albert was astounded that his friend, who had such a mastery of the language, couldn't find the words to describe the color that he wanted. And so Albert developed this system that breaks down color in just about any color you can think of. You can say, this is the color I want, this is the name, this is the number to it, and it's this universal form across the board. It's kind of like musical notes. Before Mozart had musical notes to work with, or if he didn't have musical notes and scales, he would have had to tell his symphonies, okay, strings, I want you to play a kind of a sad low note, followed by a slightly more happy note that's still kind of melancholy. Use descriptive words, but instead he can say, okay, I want you to play a C sharp followed by a D minor, or whatever it might be. That is what the Munsell system does. It gives you a language to not only speak about, but to kind of organize and think about it within your own mind. So Munsell started with 5 colors in your basic color wheel: the yellow, purple, blue, green, and red. And then he put the colors in between by combining those. So instead of adding an orange, it was a yellow red, and then he had like a yellow green and a purple blue instead of a magenta or whatnot. And then within that, each color has different shades or values that go with that, and different amounts of chroma. To fully understand his system, we have to understand 3 terms, which is hue, chroma, and value. Hue is the color, so your red, your greens, your blues. Value is the shade that it is, the amount of light or dark that it has in it. And chroma is the saturation, the intensity of the color. So he took each of these colors and broke them down into those 3 elements. And so all of a sudden you go from having this flat, circular color wheel to a dimensional color wheel. In this case, we're looking at purple, and it can go lighter or darker, but then it can also go more chromatic to neutral. I guess this is purple-blue that we're looking at here. So this would be the most intense this color can be, and then this is the least intense, which would be a neutral gray. And then along here we have 12 steps of different value. Okay, so on each page is specifically one color. This is 2.5 green, and it runs light to dark, so the value runs this way. It's getting darker, darker, darker as it goes here. But then each page also has its own inherent amount of chroma. And some colors are more chromatic than others. This here only goes to 12 in chroma. And other colors, this 7.5 yellow red goes up to 16. So each color has its own properties, and so you can pick, in thinking about color, like you might say, I want, an olive green or something, and that's going to be, maybe that seafoam green that I used in the example. Maybe he could have just gone here and said, okay, so it's not this intense, and it's a little less intense, it's probably this value, and that's the color I want. So you can really narrow down the color. It is 10 green yellow, at value 5 and chroma 6. But really, memorizing the number system isn't that necessary. The more we know, the better. But really what's important is that we're thinking about just the 3 dimensions of value. Each color is going to get lighter or darker, and it's going to have different intensities of color. Before I get into explaining the strings that I have on my palette, I think I need to cover some terminology that we'll be using throughout, and kind of briefly discuss the physics of light on form. So imagine I have a sphere here, and under here I have a little value range. And let's say I have a sphere and I pick this value 8, and I paint the whole ball this value 8. Well, the place that it's going to continue to be a value 8 is right here. If you can imagine the light source would be coming in this direction. You can tell from the way the cast shadow is following. So the light source is going to be coming this direction. So this is going to be the value 8. And then as we move towards the Terminator, it's going to be getting darker, darker, darker. Until it reaches this line, this Terminator. Now, the word Terminator sometimes it's referred to as the core shadow, the form shadow. Some people refer to it as the bedbug line. I often will use Terminator, and it's because that's where the light terminates. Terminator is actually a term that they use in space, like on the lunar landing. It would have been common to hear the word Terminator because in the moon, for example, there's no other heavenly bodies to bounce reflected light up into the shadow. And so, let's say this is the sun, this is the moon. Half of the moon is lit up, and half of it is in complete darkness. And so, where that Terminator is, the light completely terminates. Now, the reason that is because, at this light most facing plane, there's just more area for the light to hit. Those light particles are just going to bombard it, and so it's going to really illuminate it. As that sphere starts to turn away, there's less surface area for the particles to hit. And then over here you can see with a glancing light, there's just very little light can get it, and so can hit that. And so what happens is it gets darker, darker, darker as it moves towards the Terminator. And actually, once you hit that 30-degree mark, right here, it becomes exponentially darker, darker, darker. So it's kind of a slow gradation and degradation of value as we go this way, and then you hit that 30-degree mark where it's the glancing light, and it's just exponentially darker, darker, darker until you get to the Terminator. Now the highlight is separate from the lightmost facing plane, and we'll get into the highlight a little later. So some terms we'll want to use: lightmost facing plane. Like if we drew an arrow out of each one of these. Imagine this was a disco ball, and we broke it down into little segments, and each segment had an arrow coming out of it, pointing in different directions. This one would be pointing right towards the light source. So we have lightmost facing plane, we have highlight, we have half light, or sometimes I'll refer to it as dark light, and that's where in that glancing light it really darkens down. We have reflected light, which is light that's hitting the floor or an area around the shadow and bouncing back up. We have a cast shadow. I might talk about a penumbra, and it's this edge over here that kind of gets softer in a shadow. I'll often think about my value scale and break, this, in this little value scale here, I'll break it down into shadow, these first 3 values, and then all the rest of this is light, and the 9 value is highlight. So when I was a student and I was painting casts, I mixed up some neutral colors, and I tubed them up and would paint the cast, because casts are plaster, and so they're just black and white, and so just to help me understand and get a handle on painting, I would do these Grizz Eye paintings that were just black and white. So I pre-tubed everything, and I'd mix it up, and it became very helpful for me because I would mix up a little mixing pool here, and just, I'd put my darkest dark here, I'd put my white here, and then get a gradation going here. And it made it nice because this surface kind of becomes this surface. And so here's the lightmost facing plane. If this sphere were this color, I'd put that there. And then as I move into the highlight, I would go to the white. And then as I move again to the Terminator, it's getting darker, darker, darker. So I can just with my brush pick up there, then I'd go there, and then I'd go there. And just as I move down this gradation, it's kind of holding my hand and like just pulling me through it. And so this became a very easy way for me to understand how to paint. But then I threw in color, and all of a sudden it was much more complicated. And I would find I would get these different these different pools all over my palette, and I would think if I mix this pool with this pool, it equals the nose or whatever it might be. And I remember at the end of the day, sometimes I would, I'm just in this zone, I'm painting, and I'm thinking, I'm the best painter in the world, I'm so good. And then the next day I would start up and I'd go, okay, I'm going to pick up where I left off and finish this cheek. And I'd try and mix the colors, and I just couldn't remember how I got there. And every time I'd start, I'd be like, I'm the worst painter in the world. And then by the end of the session again, I'd figure it out, and I'd have this pull and this pull and this pull, and I'm just firing on all cylinders. Or even worse, it would happen is I'm painting, and all of a sudden my pool of paint out here starts to shrink down, and so I would start. I'd try and compensate by putting mediums in it to make it last longer, and eventually it runs out, and then I was painting so good, and I don't know how to get back to it, and I'd mix something in to be close, but not quite what I was doing. And so I wanted a way of standardizing that. I ended up coming up with a neutral or a warm neutral string that I can combine with my neutral string. And At first, I would do a color study and kind of mix the colors just off of my color study, and mix up a little string like this and use that. But I found that I was pretty much mixing this same color every time. I wanted a way of kind of standardizing this neutral mixture, and so I came to the Munsell system, which most flesh you can mix up in some variation of yellow red, and so I went with this 7.5 yellow red at chroma 4, because I mean you put it on my skin and it's a pretty good fit. This and 5 yellow red is also a good one. This might be a little bit closer to me. You know, it's pretty close to my natural skin tone. This is probably a little closer to me because I'm a little bit more pink. So I was standing in a group of friends, with a group of friends, and each of us, you know, we took out this. We were kind of geeking out, talking Munsell, and we took out these color chips, and we had a 7.5 yellow red at chroma 4. We had a 5 at chroma 4, and we all passed it around and just put it on our flesh like this. And this 7.5 yellow red was the closest to all of us, and so I felt like it was a good color to kind of standardize my palette. And so I mix up this string right here. And there's 7 steps in there, and so I mix that up on my palette, and then if I combine them and get a gradation going between my warm paint and my cool paint, then all of a sudden this becomes a little bit more complex. And so now it runs dark to light and cool to warm. And so let's say I painted a sphere this color right here. This entire sphere is this color. Then, okay, a light most facing plane, I'm going to pick that color, go right there. And then as I move towards the Terminator, getting darker, 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 it's going to be both getting darker and becoming more neutral. And so, if for this path, if I just move at a diagonal through this mixing pool, it will be getting darker, 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 and gradually less chromatic as we move towards the Terminator. Flesh is much more nuanced than just this. Like this doesn't really look like flesh. If I did an entire painting with just this, it wouldn't look alive. And so I have a full palette of all the colors, and I mix those colors into this mixture. And so this is a self-portrait I did a few years back. And let's say I started with this cheek. Well, this cheek, you know, so most of my skin is a little bit more yellow. It's pretty close to 7.5 yellow red, but it might start to lean to a 5 yellow red, which is a slightly more red than this. And so here I would pick colors from, you know, straight from the tube, mix them into my flesh pool here, and kind of mix up whatever plane this is. And then the same thing happens here, is if I move at a diagonal, this diagonal, towards the Terminator, it's going to be getting darker, 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 and it's going to be losing chroma and becoming more neutral, which is going to happen because as you move away from this lightmost facing plane, it's going to be getting darker, 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 but it's also going to be losing chroma. You lose chroma when you move towards the Terminator, and also when you move towards the highlight. And so that's a lot to digest. Everything I just explained. But as we move through this painting, I'm going to be talking about all these elements, and I think everything will come into focus a little bit better. And once we look at a more practical use of all those terms, that we just learned, I think we'll begin to grasp them a little bit better. Okay, so now we're going to jump into painting, and I'll talk a little bit about the colors that I use and why I've chosen to use them. Along here I have cadmium yellow, and I use M-Gram brand. I have Old Holland has some good colors that I like. This one is Brilliant Yellow Light. I have a Yellow Ochre from Rublev. I have an Cadmium Orange from Gamblin, an Orange Ochre from Rublev, a Burnt Sienna from Winsor Newton, a Brilliant Yellow Reddish from Old Holland. This is Terra Rosa from Holbein. This is Vermilion from Rublev. This is Alizarin Crimson, Winsor Newton. Radiant Blue from Gamblin, and Viridian from M-Gram. And now each of these I have on there. I kind of geeked out a little bit, Munsell-wise, and I kind of charted out all these colors. So just this section of the Munsell, I transferred onto this board, and this board tells me, it's over here is neutral, and here's all the most chromatic colors that you can get in the Munsell system, and then each of these little dots represents one of these colors or other colors that I sometimes use, and I found where they were on here. And so I've set up my palette to follow this color wheel so that I know, like, if my flesh needs to tip a little bit more yellow, then I go this way. If it needs to tip a little bit more red, I go this way. So along here, this completely follows the color wheel, getting more red and more yellow and over, all the way over here to the blues. I don't have a lot of blues and greens on my palette because I tend to use my neutrals because neutrals tend to be look very blue. Sometimes I'll have an ultramarine on there. Now the strings that I have up here, this neutral, this is Van Dyke Brown from Gamblin, and I just mixed it with white, and I am going to make a little string here, a little gradation, and I'm just going to grab. This is how I set up my palette at the beginning of every day. I just, so I squish out the paint because as I paint, this is going to become diminished, and I can replenish it up in here. you know how your teachers are always trying to get you to use more paint? This has really helped me to use more paint, because the reason I wasn't using my paint was because the mixtures that I would mix would start to fade away, and so then I would start using thinner and thinner. But this is great because I can always replenish my mixtures when they start to get low. Now, this bottom one is a mixture of, I start by using Asphaltum. Asphaltum is also Gamblin, and it's an equal value to this Van Dyke Brown. Now, Gamblin gave both of these colors kind of fancy names to make them sound artistic, so Bone Black this Van Dyke Brown is actually Bone Black. Most Van Dyke Browns that you buy they lean a little purple, but I like this Van Dyke Brown because it's very neutral. To mix this entire string, I just had to mix white in. Now, but if you read the label, it's just bone black, and bone black is ivory black. You can no longer make ivory black because they made it by burning tusks, and you can no longer burn tusks because elephants are endangered, of course. And so now ivory black is made by burning bone, and so this, I think they would have been better off just calling it bone black. Asphaltum, if you read the ingredients, is bone black mixed with Mars red. And I like that because it just leans a little bit more red, but it's the same value. And, because if you don't have Asphaltum, you can use maybe a burnt umber. But burnt umber is much lighter than that, so you have to mix it a little bit with black to get it to be that same value. Then the rest of this string, I use Asphaltum in these darker colors, and orange ochre from Rublev is really nice, and so I use a combination of orange ochre and Rublev. Rublev's orange ochre, Asphaltum, white, and a little bit of yellow ochre here. As I'm setting up my palette, I want to make sure that these are aligning at the same value as the paint above them. So up here, they're all lined up so that they're all the same value. Now I have one more value in my neutrals than I do in my cool neutrals than I do my warm neutrals. And I just like it gets pretty nuanced up by a highlight, and so I like to have that option. On my palette I have two whites. This is Rublev Lead White number 2. It's mixed with walnut oil. And I like it because it has this really stringy quality to it. And the stringy quality is good because it really holds its shape. If I lay down a brush stroke and I want it to stay that brush stroke, this is a great paint to use because it has that nice body. So I use that lead white. I like lead white because it's a more transparent paint, and flesh is very transparent. You have all these layers, and so I like the effect that it gets. I also have on my palette a titanium white, and I like it because it covers it. Okay, so now with these laid out, if this runs, I typically just these kind of mix together as I paint. They kind of become they mix together. I don't typically mix them together just naturally or in the beginning, but as an example, I'll do this. So now this runs dark to light, cool to warm, and then when I start painting a form, then I'm going to pick the lightmost facing plane, which is right here on the nose. Now it's interesting, we had the little sphere up here, and we were trying to decide what is the lightmost facing plane. And we were sometimes on my drawings I'll make a little arrow to indicating that, just so I know mentally. And with a model, it's easy to tell what the lightmost facing plane is, because you just look up at the light. But this is more tricky because the light source is in the mirror, and so I can't just say, oh, the light source is like that. I have to look at the relationship with me. So the light is coming here, so I have to kind of look and see where it is in there. So the light source is coming down. Let's see. The light source is actually coming this way. As I do this, I'm just looking at my hand and seeing where it goes. Yeah, so the light source is right here. So this is going to be our lightmost facing plane. on a cast, you can go up to it and point. Like I always would grab a pencil or something and go up and, those plaster casts, you can put it right on the surface and you can see exactly where the plane is. So as this moves away, like right now this is pointing right at the light. And then as it moves away this way, it's getting darker, darker, darker. So, okay, it can kind of be tricky to figure out the light source because in the mirror, because it's the reverse image. Okay, so we've covered my palette, why I lay it out the way I do and the colors that I use. And so let's get into some painting. So, like I was saying earlier, if I'm just using these two strings, this just doesn't look very fleshy to me. It has a semblance of flesh, but it's just it's kind of a dead flesh. And so I need to intensify the chroma and actually paint what I'm seeing. And so there's a few planes that I like to do some color notes to myself on every form that I paint. So right here I'm going to start with the nose. And so with the nose, I like to mix up a lightmost facing plane. I go in with some alizarin crimson right here. It's feeling a little too pinky, so I want to turn it a little bit more red, or a little bit more orange. I'm going to throw that in. I'm going to lay that down. It's a little too dark, so I just move in this direction. So, because as I go this way, it's a little lighter. I'm going to move in so I can really see that chroma. I'm actually going to really try and spruce up that chroma with a little orange up in here. You know, at this early stage, it's easy. Sometimes I'll just paint right over the last mark I did, but at this early stage, it's easy just to wipe out a stroke I don't like. I'm going to wipe that out, and now I'm going to put down this light most facing plane. So in every form that I paint, I like to mix up the light most facing plane. I like to mix up my lightest light, which is this highlight. I like to mix up my darkest dark. Is probably going to be this nostril here. Now I have to keep in mind the overall. You know, earlier as we did this wipeout, which by the way it's nice and dry now, so I can paint right into it. But earlier when we were doing the wipeout, we were trying to establish a hierarchy of value. And I decided that probably right in here, there's not much reflected light at all up in here, and it's a black hat. And so this is probably our darkest dark. And so everything else has to be subject to this. So even this nostril, it looks very dark, but that's because it's surrounded by lighter things around it. So I have to keep in mind that I have to keep it lighter than that. So I'm mixing up from a few values down from my darkest dark, because this here is going to be my darkest dark. So and the last one I like to mix up is the shadow value of whatever given form I'm painting, because that shadow value is going to be much less dark than our darkest dark. Okay, so those four planes are my lightest light, my darkest dark, my shadow value, and then my light most facing plane. And you can see how just in setting up those four planes, I'm not only kind of organizing my mental thoughts, but I'm organizing my palettes. And I've turned kind of this monochromatic, dead-looking palette into, it's starting to look much more alive. And I know that, this correlates to that lightmost facing plane of the nose, and this correlates to the shadow value. This correlates to the darkest dark of the nose. Now, one reason I was kind of leery of moving towards using strings because I felt like I was a good reactive painter, just like an intuitive painter. I'd mix up a color that I saw, mix it up, and put it on my palette, and I usually got fairly good color that I was proud of. So I was afraid that if I moved into a system, it would be, I would lose that ability to make good color. But I find that once I start painting, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm still reacting to what I'm seeing, and I'm putting it down on the palette, and I'm pulling in these colors just intuitively. And everything we just talked about earlier sounds kind of nerdy and kind of the opposite of fun. The opposite of why we got into art to create. It's a 7.5 yellow red at chroma whatever, and it sounds so technical and probably against most of our artist natures. But once I have my palette set up and I really thought about it, then I can really jump in and just react to my visual experience. And so, let's see, I'm still not over it. I feel like I can adjust this lightmost facing plane a little bit. I need to maybe throw in a little yellow. Tip it a little further down along the color wheel. So I'm going to start out and I'm just going to paint this form, the entirety of the nose. And what I like to do often is, I've kind of established those planes that we talked about, and then I like to just work away from that, work a little strip. Maybe I'll do a strip this way and that way, and you can just figure out the underlying form. So like I said earlier, I don't typically use much gel or medium. Because I feel like oil paint has enough oil in it, and so I just used that as my medium. But in this case, I do have some medium on my palette usually. I usually use oleo gel, which is the linseed oil from Rublev, and and it's more of a feel thing. Like sometimes the paint just doesn't want to go on the way I want it to go, and so I'll put that on there. In this case, I need this to dry a little faster, and so I'm going to use this Oleor's gel from Rublev, which increases the drying time. Doesn't have dryers in it, but it sets the paint up a little faster. Because, again, we're kind of having an expedited time frame here. And so I want this to be able to, I want to be able to paint on this tomorrow. So I'm going to introduce some of that resin into this mixing pool. All right. There we go. So now I am getting this This is a very fast turn, so I have to get my gradation to go fast. Or if I had a long slow turn like a cheek, I could stretch this out quicker. This, it's tricky. If I get too far up there, I'm outside of my light source. So I have to remain back here. So that I can get that to work. All right, so I'm just moving along the form, and I'm following this. That's probably getting a little bit too dark, so I need to come back this way. I need to tip that a little bit more yellow. It's still a little neutralized, but it's just a little bit more yellow. I'm going to run this all the way down to this end here, where that nose begins. This far side of the nose turns very quickly. So it really darkens down over here. Now, what I just put down is a little bit too gray, and so on my palette, I go back to the same spot. This is where I mixed it, and now I move a little bit lower down here. So it's going to be a little bit more chromatic and a little bit warmer. Still a little dark, so I just move to the right. Still need to make it a little lighter, so I move to the right again. So any adjustment I make on here, I know it becomes very simple. If I put down a mark, I know everything on this face is going to be pretty close to a 7.5 yellow-red, because that's just kind of my natural skin tone. So this mixture is pretty close. And I just have to decide, what is my value? How dark or how light is it? I need to decide how chromatic or how neutral is it? And then I take my best guess at it, and if I'm wrong, then I just make a slight adjustment. If it needs to go more neutral, I move up. If it needs to become more chromatic, I go down. If it needs to be darker, I go left. If it needs to go brighter, I go right. And so it really just kind of holds my hand and walks me through this. I mean, I have so much to think about because I'm doing this on each plane that I touch. And so it's nice to just have my palette organized so that my thoughts can be organized. And every stroke, at this stage, I don't want to be jumping around a lot. I kind of like the idea of every stroke that I lay down is right next to the last stroke that I just did. Again, that's too neutral, so I come down, make it a little bit more chromatic. Paint's getting a little thick there, so I'm going to kind of lift out just with my brush. I go in and kind of just lift it out. I'm using a round brush on this nose because it's very quick turn, so each of these planes is going to be tipping away from the light. In a very fast, small little increment. One thing I like to do is I like to think about this as if it were as if my face were like a stained glass window. And each little plane that I see is a little pane in that stained glass window. And so I'm mixing up a very small little window plane and then putting it down. And then I move to the next one. And so like this little stroke that I just put down is basically one little pane in that. And then I'm going to move down and paint the next little window pane right next to that. Really get that to turn. Down in here it's actually shadow. Nostrils can be tough to judge because the light kind of passes through that. There's no bone in there, and so if the light hits your cheek, it bounces off, and you can easily judge the color. But with a nostril, that light, some light bounces off of it, but a lot of it actually penetrates and kind of bounces around inside of it and kind of illuminates it in the same way that, if you held a flashlight to your finger, or ears, when ears are backlit, they tend to get really red and glow. Your finger tends to really glow, like E.T. if you put a flashlight behind it. The same principle is going on with nostrils, because that light is able to penetrate it. And so this nostril just isn't that dark as it would be, or the shadow on this nostril isn't as dark as it would be if there was bone behind it. If I really look at the chroma, I think I can up the intensity in that light most facing plane. The further away I get, the grayer, the less light is hitting me and the grayer it gets. But if I move in here, right in the trajectory of that light, I can really see that chroma. So, I'm missing a color. Need to add one color to this. So the color I forgot to put on the palette is orange molybdate from Rublev, and it's kind of like CAD red light, similar to that. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get the punch that I wanted. In the back of my mind, I knew I wanted to go to this color, and I kept trying different ones. But this is the one I want. Now, one thing about my palette, so I have a lot of different hues on there. But some of them I have are the same hues, but different with different chromas and stronger and weaker tinting power. Because sometimes you don't want your paint to influence the mixture too much, but sometimes you want it very chromatic so that you just need a little bit to push the chroma up. And so this is very chromatic, and so just a little bit really influences my chroma. So whenever I paint, I like to have two brushes of the same size. I think of one as my light brush and one as my dark brush. So I always buy them together. I always buy in sets. And inevitably, the clerk at the store will think I've messed up and say, "You know, you're buying the same brush twice." like every time. But I know I am. I'm just working on this gradation. I just keep moving more to the right, more to the right again. Need a little bit more chroma, so I go down. Inevitably, like this started as a dark brush, but I was creeping across the foam, getting lighter, 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 and all of a sudden it was a light brush again. They tend to become the same brush over and over again. So it's somewhere in this middle land. Man, it changes so much. Just if I slide forward just slightly, it really grays down because I'm not in the light source. So I have to be careful. This brush used to be my dark brush. It's already back to being light. So down in here, I need to intensify the chroma. I want that to really warm up. And so even in this area, so over here I have it going chromatic to neutral. But back over here, I want this to go chromatic to neutral at value 3. This is much more neutral on this underplane, under this nose. This is a tricky little area because the planes on my nose turn so sharp that this gets light pretty quickly. But I need to make sure that I'm accounting for every one of the planes that go in between the nose, or this underside of the nose, and the shadow. All the way up to the lightmost facing plane. Way too chromatic. I thought I'd brushed out more of that chroma, or wiped out more of the chroma. That orange molybdenite is very chromatic, so it's hard to get it all out. This is getting a little thin, so I'm just going to dip back into my pre-mixed warm string. I'm constantly trying to get these gradations working. Because every piece of this form, anything living, is going to be in some type of gradation. So the form just always needs to be turning. You know, if we were robots, we'd have these flat planes. But with human flesh, or any living flesh really, every plane needs to be darker or lighter than the one beside it. Sometimes my flesh will start to look a little dead. What people call muddy. Sometimes it's referred to as muddy. It's kind of looking, I guess, muddy over there. But it's not really muddy, it's just that the gradation is wrong, or the hue, chroma, or value is just slightly off. And I always think of burnt sienna as my fix-all color, which of course it isn't, but whenever I have a gross color, I just feel like I have to add my miracle burnt sienna into it. But it has to be, Winsor Newton's has a great burnt sienna because it's pretty high in chroma. And so so it really gives a good kick without needing too much. Though sometimes I like a lower burnt sienna with a lower chroma. And Rublev has a good lower chroma burnt sienna, or lower tinting strength burnt sienna, which is oftentimes useful. Yeah, this is getting thin, so I'm just going to build it back up. And it's nice when I pull these down, because it just kind of mixes in with what I have. With this paint that I have more carefully observed, it's not going to change it too much. But what I find interesting too is I get these gradations going, and so it's almost like I'm mixing twice. I mix it first on the palette, and then I mix it again on, or then I put that same mixture over here. So it's like I'm painting my nose twice. I do it first here, and then I do it over here on the painting itself. My paint application is looking a little weak, and so I want to build up the body of it with more paint over here. I'm working on really turning this front plane up towards the light. And I don't want to jump ahead too far, but I think this might be easier if I have a little bit more information here. So I'm going to kind of throw down this highlight up here so I can start working up into the column of the nose. And again, I'm just over here in the palette, it's just I'm moving to the left. It's getting darker, so each stroke is a little bit more to the left. Now I'm coming back from the highlight and moving left and getting darker, darker, darker. I'm going to cool down that highlight a little bit. I'm kind of moving, so I wanted to use a smaller brush for these small planes, because each plane in here is really turning. But as I move over to the side plane, I want to get a bigger brush, and use a size appropriate brush. If it's a bigger form, a bigger brush. And these are synthetic rounds from Escada. Now the trick with these forms is they're not just turning in one direction. This one is, it's turning this way, getting darker, darker, darker. But it's also, this form here is turning this way. So this is the lightest point going this way, and it's getting darker, darker, darker as it goes down here. And so I have to, as I'm painting, I have to represent that gradation, which is going both this way and that way. And as I'm painting wet into wet, also, I have to account for the wet paint. So I mix up a hue, chroma, and value here, and then when I apply it into wet paint, it's going to mix with whatever I'm mixing it into and kind of change. And so I have to allow for that and either mix lighter or darker than what I think I might need. Depending on what's under there. Now this is a first pass. So I can think about it as an underpainting. But I don't necessarily like to think about it as an underpainting, because I tend to, when I know I'm going to paint another pass over it, I tend to get kind of sloppy and go, well, I'll fix it later. And so I like to treat this as if it's my final pass. And sometimes it is. Sometimes I like it so much that I'll just leave it. My first pass becomes my final pass. But typically I do a first pass, a very thoughtful first pass, and then more of a glazing second pass over the top. But I just as carefully consider the second pass as I do the first pass. It's just that the second pass becomes much easier because I've already worked out all the problems. I'm working on this nostril, so I'm going to switch back. It's a smaller form, so I'm going to switch back to my smaller brush. Kind of work this edge. Now typically when I paint, I choose a course of action and I'll just paint that. For instance, for this, I'm going to try and paint more than I typically paint today. But typically, when I have a model, I usually have a model for about 4 hours, and so I think in terms of 4-hour increments. With a self-portrait, I can go as long as I want, and so I might be able to do more. But my normal thinking for a project this size, I might do the nose and say the forehead in 4 hours, and then the next day, I would hire the model back, and maybe I would do. Maybe this eye and this cheek, all in 4 hours. And then the next day, I would do this cheek. Because this cheek is going to be much more complicated than anything else. And it's going to be a lot easier. I wouldn't want to start with this cheek because it's so big and complex. But once I had these pieces in, this will be much easier. And so that's probably how I would approach this one. Maybe I would have started with the forehead and eyes and then worked down to the nose. That could be another approach. A little later maybe I'll pull out some examples of starts, of different paintings that I've done and different routes that I've taken to get there. But today my goal is to cover all of this, which maybe is unrealistic. And so, if not that, I'm at least, my goal is to cover the nose, the forehead, and at least this eye, maybe that eye too. That's my minimum goal. My big goal is to get to this, but we'll see how it all goes. switch to my shadow brush and work this. It's a little too cool down there, so I want to just paint down here a little bit, warm it up. Maybe grab a little bit of my Miracle Paint, burnt sienna, mix it in over here. Let's switch back to my light brush. Back to my dark brush. Oh, just got too dark up here. One thing that's important to do in painting is to really separate what is shadow and then what is half light. This up here, although it darkens down, I have to keep in mind that it is not shadow, it's half light. The shadow runs under here. Kind of a warm light source. It looks like there are some cools and warms in it. And so there's going to be kind of an interplay between warms and cools, but I'm going after a warmer highlight right here on the tip. And so I'm actually going after, I put in some yellow. One thing I like to do is make sure that I don't like to have like a pure white highlight. You know, highlights usually tend to lean one color or the other. I want to make sure I get that. But the problem is you add chroma to something and it darkens it. And so you add white to lighten it and it kills the chroma. And so we're so limited with paints that we really have to have kind of workarounds. Like we have to really compress our values, because our darkest black paint is never going to be as dark as the darkest abyss, and our lightest white paint is never going to be as light as like the brightness of the sun. And so we kind of have to like compress our values down so that everything comparatively feels that it is as bright as the sun. So we have to trick our viewer into thinking that our paint, that this highlight is as bright as it is in reality, or that deep dark hole is as dark as it is in reality. And we have to do the same thing with chroma. We kind of have to compress our chroma range, because we just can't achieve the intensity of chroma in all situations of real life. For instance, if you had, let's say, a bright red shirt, and you took it out into the sun, and the sun was like really illuminating that. My brightest red paint on here is a value 5, and you add so it's somewhere in here. And if I want this to be this bright, but a brighter value, I just can't do it, because if I add white to that, it's going to go down in chroma. And so, like if I'm painting a red shirt, this is going to be I just kind of cheat and say, this is as bright as the chroma gets, and that's the value of the shirt, even if it's lighter. I'm kind of stuck with the chromas that I have.
Rembrandt, Sargent, Zorn. Throughout history, the world's finest painters have created self-portraits, which has given us a peek into the past. These have been great gifts from the artists, who have allowed us to see them as they were and to watch them from youth to old age. Self-portraits not only preserved their likeness for future generations, making them immortal, but they were considered an important tool to develop skills in portraiture without the expense of a model. In this all-new exclusive video, you have the rare opportunity to follow along step by step with one of the preeminent masters of portraiture. Gregory Mortenson is a world-famous painter whose work is highly coveted by galleries and museums from New York City to Barcelona. To be one of the rare artists to study under Mortenson is a privilege for very few, and those who want to develop the highest level portraiture skills, which transcend mere portraiture and move to emotional museum quality painting.
Hi, I'm Greg Mortenson, and every year I try and do a self-portrait from life using a mirror. And this year I decided to document my process from the initial graphite block-in all the way to the final pass, and we've documented every form that I turn and every brush stroke that I've laid down. I cover color theory and how I incorporate Munsell, why I set up my palette the way I set up my palette.
This video is the most complete and most in-depth portraiture course ever produced, giving you a level of instruction never before offered on video. Several hours of depth, giving you the understanding of each subtle nuance, which all guide you on the start to finish painting incredible museum-quality portraits. This all-new video is designed for artists of all skill levels who want to paint stunning, lifelike, emotional portraits in the style of the great masters of the past. Realistic Self-Portraits with Gregory Mortenson is now available on DVD and streaming video. Order yours today.
I'm hoping you enjoyed that segment of Realistic Self-Portraits with Gregory Mortenson. What a great instructor. Again, if you like the Atelier experience, we've got 24 hours of it. It's absolutely the best way to learn. It's not just about self-portraits, it's about getting skin tones and drawing right and getting all the parts right in doing a realistic painting. A self-portrait is a great way to learn it because then you don't have to hire a model. You are the model. Anyway, let's get right to the interview with Greg Mortenson. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur. Today we're here with Gregory Mortenson. Gregory, welcome.
Thanks, Eric. Good to be here.
Greg or Gregory?
My friends call me Greg. You can call me Greg. My art name is Gregory.
All right.
Sounds more official.
Well, for those of us who are friends, and everybody watching now is a friend.
Okay, so they can call me Greg. I like it.
So I'm very curious. You have become one of the most premier figurative artists, portrait artists that I know. Museum quality. You're part of this movement of young artists that are really making an impact in the world. And I want to know how it all began. What are your first memories of art?
Well, I was always drawing. My first memories, I remember the first drawing I remember doing was of a horse. I grew up on a ranch, and I remember just the delight in my mom's eyes as she, the horses have that little U-shaped head.
Yeah.
And I drew a U-shaped head, and she just thought I was brilliant or something. And,
So
it was just probably a stick figure horse, but she was proud of me.
You got early encouragement.
Yeah. And then in kindergarten, I remember, my parents tell the story. I don't really remember this actually, but they tell the story about going to their first parent-teacher conference for me, and my teacher, Mrs. Carlson, I just remembered. But she said at first she was really worried about me because, we'd have the little art projects and all the other kids would be done and I would still be drawing away at the table, and she'd have to come and get me and say, okay, it's time to move on. And so she thought maybe I was a little slow or something, and then she would look at my little drawings, and I was drawing, cowboys and Indians, and my cowboys would have scarves on and little hats. I mean, they're stick figures with scarves and hats, and the Indians would have fringe, and I'd draw little teepees, and the teepees would have paintings of horses on them and things like that. So I was just getting caught up in all those little details at a young age.
So you were really observant.
Yeah, obviously. I guess so, yeah.
And you were slow and meticulous.
Yeah, yeah.
So did you have early dreams of becoming an artist, or was it the encouragement you were getting that kind of took you to the next level? What happened?
Well, I don't know that I had early dreams of being an artist because I really didn't know. I didn't think of it as being a career.
Uh-huh.
Because the art that I was drawn to were these 19th century artists. We had these. This was before the internet, so we had all these encyclopedias, and I remember just thumbing through those and seeing just these great 19th century paintings, like David. I remember I would draw little David paintings, and so I kind of thought this was a thing of the past, because when in school, when they talk about contemporary artists, I just wasn't really interested in that. And so at a young age, I was always, I never took art classes in school. Well, I did up until I got into like middle school or high school. And then I was kind of focused on, I was going to be a doctor. Both my parents work in the medical field, and so I kind of envisioned myself going that route. So I was taking my chemistries and biologies. And I always had interest in taking art classes, but I'd sign up for them. And, you go to the counselor and you tell them the classes you want. And I would say I want art, some sort of art. And there was always some conflict with like a AP biology or something. And so they'd put me in the biology class rather than the art class. And just every year after year, that would happen. And I think I took one art class in high school.
So it's interesting because I sense that you have a bit of a scientific mind. So it'll be interesting to see how that science comes out when you're talking about art, the science of light or the science of color.
Yeah, I definitely will sound like a nerd as I get caught up in all this art terminology.
Well, we're all nerds when it comes to art, and that's a good thing. Absolutely. Nerds conquer the world anyway, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are nerds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you went to college, and was that about art, or was that about going to medical school?
Yeah, so I was on a pre-med track, and finally in college I was more in control of my schedule, and so I said, all right, I'm taking some art classes.
And where did you go to college?
So I grew up in southern Utah, and I went to a little community college there, Dixie State College. Was my first year, and I ended up taking several art classes, and it was all life drawing, painting, the figurative and portrait stuff, and I was taking a crazy amount of credits because I was pretty much full-time art and full-time pre-med, and I think I was like taking 24 credits a semester. I got my associates in a year.
You must have been very burned out.
Well, I didn't really notice. I was just gung-ho about it, and I was so excited to be painting. But after my first semester, my art teacher said, hey, if you want to switch your major to art, I can get you a full tuition scholarship. And so I switched to art thinking I would still do the pre-med track at the same time and do that, and just as a declared art major. But then I just realized I liked art so much that if I was going to be putting in 40 hours a week doing something, I'd probably get good at whatever I was doing for 40 hours a week.
Right.
At the time, I was working at Domino's. Not Domino's. No, yeah, it was Domino's. And I remember just flipping boxes. I wanted to be the best box folder.
Right.
And so I got really efficient at it, and I'd have competitions there, and I was just putting all my time into that, and I realized like whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to be doing it so much, and I'm probably going to want to be the best at it. And so if I want to put all that time into something I really loved, and so I stayed with the art track.
What do you think your parents did that gave you that sense of competitiveness or being the best at whatever it is you did? You think that came from your parents, or was it just something you picked up on your own?
I don't know. I'm a middle child, and so I guess you have to stick out somehow. There's 5 kids,
Yeah.
and I have an older brother, And I still idolize my older brother. I idolized him back then, and you know, he drew, and he wrestled, and so I you know, I would wrestle, and he's 3 years older than me, and so he could beat up on me for a lot of years, and it was like, you know, so you know, there's just that like brotherly competition going on, and he would do a drawing, and I wanted to do a better drawing. And
do you still wrestle when you get together?
We should.
Yeah.
I'd like
Yeah.
that.
Send us some video of that, would you?
All right. And I guess, you know, and my dad was an artist as well,
Really?
and my grandpa. I mean, they both had full-time jobs. They did art on the side, but they would go to, I remember going to fairs, and they would get these giant pieces of wood. My grandpa would cut them down, and then they would paint like these horse scenes and mountain scenes, and then they'd go to all these art fairs throughout Utah and sell their paintings. They'd put this,
Wow.
and they'd turn them into tables and art pieces, and they'd put this nice varnish over them. And
Well, that's where it all comes from then.
yeah.
That's interesting. Is your grandfather living?
No, he passed away a while ago.
And how do your parents feel about this art thing that you're doing now?
You know, they've been nothing but supportive.
That's great.
I think, you know, I think somewhere in their mind they thought, yeah, we'll just let him get this out of his system, and he'll move on to like a real career.
We hear that a lot.
Yeah, but they never voiced that. Like, I never felt like I was making a bad decision in going into the art field. They never pulled me aside and said, you know, check yourself, son.
Son, we're worried about you.
Yeah.
So you were in college,
Uh-huh.
and you became an art major, and
Uh-huh.
you were going to do both.
Uh-huh.
What happened then?
I just became more and more disinterested in following that track, and you know, my art load just got bigger and bigger, and pretty soon I was just doing art. Now I ran into some trouble because with trying to get an art education there, because you know, I wasn't really interested in the painting, like becoming like a paint major. I remember I took my first painting class. Once I got my associates, I went on to the next school, and I took a painting class, and I remember she said, "All right, we're going to do a painting today. Why don't you get out your we started with pastels in this painting course, and she said, get your pastels out, and just want you to move your hand over the pastels, and one of them is going to start talking to you, and then take that pastel and just put it on the paper and move it around until it stops talking to you, and then put it back and do it again. The next one will talk to you." And it just, I don't know, it just wasn't what I wanted. And so
You didn't hear it talking, did you?
it was kind of the silent thing as I moved my hands over it. And so I changed my major from fine art, from a painting major to illustration. Because illustration, you had the models. And I went from Dixie College to Utah State, and they had this great program. Glenn Edwards was the head, and it was like on Friday, it was an all-day class where you would go from like 8 in the morning until 4 with one model.
Was this in Salt Lake City?
This was in Logan, Utah.
Logan, okay.
And so I was just getting a ton of life drawing experience and loving it. And then Glenn Edwards retired, and the program got turned over to the grad students, who the grad students had been, you know, on the easels next to me during those classes, and you know, they're like they're like my friends, you know, and all of a sudden they were the teacher. And so I decided to change schools, and not only that, they were kind of eliminating the illustration field. It was becoming more digital, And so it was kind of like, if you were in the illustration field, you could, or degree, you could finish out your time, but that was going to be the swan song for the program. And so I changed schools and I went down to Southern Utah University and studied under a guy, Perry Stewart, who had been Glenn Edwards' student. And I studied there. Again, it was great. We had models every day, and figure drawing, and portrait drawing, and painting. And after a semester there, he changed schools, went up to UVSC.
You keep driving them out.
Yeah, I know. That program got turned over to the grad students, and so I followed him, and I just kept bouncing around. And all in all, I ended up going to 5 different universities looking for, just trying to study with this guy and this guy. And after a while, I kind of gave up, and I got offered a wrestling scholarship out in Southern Virginia University. And I went out there, and they didn't have, they had some great teachers there, but it wasn't a very robust art program. And so I kind of maxed out. I took all the life drawing classes, and in the end, I kind of just made my own curriculum where I would get, my friends would come in and sit for me, but they're my friends, and I'm not really paying them, and so they would only sit for so long.
Right.
And so in the end, like my senior year, I ended up just doing a lot of self-portraits because I was like a very faithful model, and I was always there for myself.
Well, I think that's one of the magics of the self-portrait, right, is that oftentimes those of us who are in situations where we either can't get access to models, can't afford models, or we want to do something in depth and we just can't get a model to come in for that amount of time, that's where the self-portrait really becomes a great learning opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, because, well, I found too, like, even in those live drawing classes, it was usually, one session. The longest I ever had a model was maybe 3 sessions, so 9 hours. But it was typically like a 3-hour, just alla prima drawing of a figure or a portrait. And, and so you can only take your skills so far with these quick portraits. Because, you can do these fast gestural drawings, and they look beautiful and astounding. But if you were to push them a little bit further, spend 9 hours, 12 hours, 20 hours, 40 hours, you're going to start to see problems with your structure that you wouldn't even know was there unless you push it further.
Right, your foundation has to be right.
Yeah, and so if you're just doing these 3 hours, you can just kind of settle and say, man, I'm so good at this. And you won't even realize that, oh wait, I need to build that foundation that you're talking about. One of the benefits with doing a self-portrait is that you can really invest the time that you need, all the hours that you need to push a painting or a drawing as far as you can. Typically I was doing all these quick drawings and paintings, 3 hours, 4 hours, and they were this nice alla prima finish, but I never really got to the heart of it, and I never pushed it far enough to see that the structure could have been better. And so with a self-portrait, I was doing 2-3 a day. I would start in the morning.
You were doing 2 or 3 a day self-portraits?
Self-portraits, yeah. I would start with morning light, and I would use my morning light and do a 3-hour session, and then I'd go to lunch, and then I would do after lunch I would do another 3-hour session with the afternoon light, and then I'd come home and do an evening session with artificial light. And so, I'm getting, right there is 9 hours of model time, which, $15 an hour every day just would have added up if I was paying a model.
Right. So you went to Virginia, and you did a wrestling scholarship, and you were doing a little bit of art, Did you do any more education in art after that?
So yeah, I finished my degree and went off into the world, and I just didn't feel qualified. You know, and I mean, I was basically an illustration major, and I was doing some illustration work. I was, you know, did some magazine, little spot illustrations. I did some cover work, and then I ended up getting a job working as a designer, which I mean, I had taken some basic design classes and kind of an introduction to, you know, the Adobe suite. But I wasn't very computer savvy, but I got a job on the strength of my drawing portfolio. And then, so I was working for HP. They had this small little design team in Utah. And I kind of learned on the job. Like, they would give me a project and I'd be working, and I would say, I'd go take a smoke break. I don't smoke, but I'd step outside and call my friend and say, hey, how do you outline text? Or, you know, I'd ask him, and he'd say, oh, the shortcut is, you know, he would tell me how to do it, and I'd go back and do it. I studied with William Whitaker and Patrick Devonis for a couple of years. It was kind of an apprenticeship of types.
Were they in southern? Oh, they were where?
They were in northern Utah, in Springville and Provo.
Okay.
We actually we were working right alongside with the Springville Museum of Art, which is a beautiful museum if you're ever
right. Vern Swanson.
Vern Swanson is an amazing gentleman, and they have this beautiful Russian Impressionist collection.
Oh, they sure do, and a great restaurant across the street called La Casita was one of my favorites. I used to live out there.
Oh, great.
We'll talk about that sometime.
But right there in the museum across the street, they have, it belongs to the museum, but they had like a little warehouse, and we, with beautiful north light, and we had the figure, and we were painting from life, and I'd paint with Bill Whitaker in the morning, doing comparative drawing, and then Patrick Devonis in the afternoon, and he was working site size. He had studied with Richard Lack, and so we were, you know, using that Boston School method of site size, and I studied with them for 2 years, and then ended up moving out to New York, where they had just started the Grand Central Atelier, which was kind of an extension of Water Street. For years, Jacob had his school.
Jacob Collins.
Jacob Collins,
right.
Yeah. Jacob Collins had been teaching at the Water Street Atelier. And it was actually through him and his students that I started to realize that, oh, wow, wait, there's contemporary artists that are doing exactly what I want to do. And, you know, I'd go online at, you know, Arcadia Gallery, and Michael Grimaldi was there, and Dan Thompson, and, you know, all these people that had studied under Jacob, and even back in my university days, I was looking at their work and going, that was when it started, like maybe my senior year. I was like, oh wait, there are these people doing this. And Jacob Collins starts this school, the Grand Central Atelier, which had, that first year, it was Michael Grimaldi, Kate Lehman, Dan Thompson, and Jacob Collins. Like, just like my idols at the time.
A dream team.
It was this dream team. And yeah, so I go out there and I'm just like starstruck kind of. And I went out there, painted, or studied with them for 4 years. After the 4 years at the GCA, Jacob actually invited me to study, or not study with him, just come to his personal studio. And so every morning for 2 years, I would go at 8 in the morning to 12, and we'd split a model, and I would just paint alongside of him, which is Really, one of the most helpful things in my career was just, he in that 2-year period, he didn't really critique me. He didn't come and assess my drawings or my paintings, but it was, I could see we were solving the same problems.
Right, you could see what he was doing.
Yeah, and I'd struggle with something, and I'd look over at what he was doing, and he was struggling with the same thing, and maybe resolving it the same way I'm doing, maybe doing something else. But it was just like such a learning experience to see how he would work, and also see him develop, like work with the galleries and develop shows. And he had all these shows at the time, and he would have a painting of a model in this position, and then I have the same painting of a model, in this position, which is kind of nice in an art history sort of way.
Absolutely. So what happened after the time with Jacob?
So I realized that a lot of the artists that were successful had a lot of the same things on their resumes. They were being published in notable art magazines. Their work was out there for people to see. They were getting their name out by winning different art competitions. They were perhaps teaching, and they were in notable galleries. And so I thought, man, I'm not doing any of these. None of these are on my resume. So I immediately went after those. And interestingly enough, it was kind of like I just put it out into the universe and thought, okay, I have to do this checklist. And I was lucky enough that things started just to fall into my lap. I took the initiative to put my work into some competitions, which is kind of nerve-wracking, and everyone hates rejection. But I did well, that first year of like really saying, I'm going for it.
That really is the first step, I believe, because the reality is you don't get art magazines. I published several. You don't get art magazines until you get noticed. You don't get galleries until you get noticed. So how do you get noticed? You get noticed by starting to win art competitions. And then when you start winning art competitions, that's when you start getting some publicity. People go, oh, hey, he or she is pretty good. Maybe we should do an emerging artist article or something like that. And then the galleries then see those and they go, oh, emerging artist, we need to grab this person. That's kind of my perspective on it.
Which is exactly how it turned out for me.
Yeah.
It opened so many doors.
As a matter of fact, you were on the cover of our magazine.
Yeah.
Fine Art Connoisseur.
Yeah. And I was on the cover of American Art Magazine, I was on the very last cover before they went under.
American Artists.
American Artists, yeah.
Yeah, what a tragedy that went away.
I loved that magazine. I was really sad to see that go. Yeah, so that first year I entered the Raymar art competition. I took second in that. I took the Greenhouse Salon, the International Salon from the Greenhouse Gallery. I took second in that. And the Portrait Society of America, they have their international competition that I had been following for years, and I was a finalist in that also that year, and from that the Portrait Society, right when I was thinking I need to start looking for a gallery, and I really wanted a New York gallery because that's kind of every artist.
Right.
That was my artist dream, go to
Right.
New York and be in a New York gallery,
Right.
and like Arcadia was my favorite gallery of all time. As a college student, anytime I'd go to New York, I'd be sure to go in to see. Well,
Arcadia really took a lead in the figurative movement and was bright enough to really understand where that was all going, and they kind of took the edgier artists and really promoted all of that. And they were really a leader, still are, a leader in the whole figurative movement, the what I would call the young realists.
Yeah. Steve really kind of has his finger on the pulse of what's going on.
Yeah.
Steve Diamond over there.
Yeah.
But I got a call from them just one day out of the blue. I was teaching a workshop actually, and got a call from them that they wanted me to bring my portfolio in, and so I took it down, and they started representing me, which was great. I kind of felt like I was being called by the Yankees or something, you know.
It's George Steinbrenner.
Yeah, exactly.
Steve Diamond.
Exactly.
Oh, that's funny. So, what has happened to your career since then? You kind of got launched. You obviously got into Steve's gallery, and so give us the fast track on what has happened since then.
Well, I'm just painting away.
And you're making a living as an artist.
Making a living, yeah.
One of the things that I think is so critical, you figured out some of the pieces of it a lot of people never figure out, but one of my missions in life is to train artists in the other part of life as an artist, and that is how to make a living, how to get to the point where they can make a living as an artist, how to market their work, how to get into art galleries, how to win art competitions and so on, and I devote a lot of my time to that. And that's something I want to try to get integrated into these ateliers around the world so that there's a piece that is getting them ready for the world, because that's not something anybody's teaching. Now, you learned a lot of it just by osmosis, being around Jacob, who is masterful at that, but that's not something most people ever get.
Yeah. I feel lucky, because you hear, like, it all seems intimidating, like I was thinking about getting a gallery, and just the thought of like taking it in and like saying, please let me be in your gallery. No gallery owner wants that.
No, it's always better to get invited.
Yeah. Because
it's stronger. Now, you had an iconic image that I think made your career. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know.
Well, you did a painting of a man in a hat, a fuzzy hat. Was that a self-portrait?
That was a self-portrait.
Okay. So was that something that you won competitions with?
Yeah, I did win several competitions with that.
Yeah.
I guess I only entered it in one competition, but yeah.
I think that sometimes a career can be made with one iconic image that is so good, that gets so much publicity. That seems to be what happened to you as a starting point.
So yeah, interestingly enough, that image came about because I was trying to fulfill those 4 checklists where I wanted to be published in a magazine. I had, at one of the Portrait Society conferences, it was before I hadn't ever entered anything in a Portrait Society conference. I was still a student, and I went on a scholarship to go to that. And while I was there, I met Michael Gormley, who was the editor of American Artist magazine, and we went out to breakfast one morning, and he said, "Hey, if you ever need anything, if you want to do an article, anything, just give me a call, and we'll do something. I love your work." But at the time I was a student, and I was just scared. I didn't think, what do I have to offer? And so I kind of just sat on that for a couple of years in the back of my mind, and then one day, I'd actually just been married. I just married my wife, and at that stage, it was like I was really worried about, I need to provide, be responsible, and grow up and be a man, and so it was like 4 a.m, and I'm thinking. I got up and I wrote Michael Gormley this email where I pitched to him a a 3-part series where I kind of highlight my process, and I sent that off to him, and I didn't hear back from him. A few months later, he comes across it, because I had a piece in a magazine, and I was just replying to, because I was in a self-portrait competition, and I replied to that, and so he didn't really read it. It got kind of pushed into all the other self-portrait, into that folder, and so he didn't really read it for months, and then he came across it, and he's like, I love the idea, Greg, let's do it. I mean, I was worried. I was like, because I hadn't heard back from him, I
thought you were rejected.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, this is going to be awkward the next time I see Michael Gormley, and he's going to give me a pat on the shoulder, like, maybe sometime, but you're not quite ready. It was kind of the response I thought I was going to get. But he loved the idea, and he said, yeah, so we have to go to print in like 2 weeks if you want to get into the June edition, or whatever edition it was, I can't remember the month. I decided to do a self-portrait because I knew I would be there, and I could do that, and it was kind of nerve-wracking because so in 2 weeks I had to have the drawing part, and then the second edition a month later, and the third edition, and so it was like sink or swim, and it all worked out. It was like under the pressure, it all worked out, and the final image ended up being on the cover.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
That was huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, little things like that can go a long way.
Yeah.
That can really boost a career.
Yeah.
So tell me, I'm curious, you did a project recently that had to do with children in Haiti.
Oh, yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, that didn't start out with the intentions of being a series or even painting. I just had the privilege of going down there shortly after the earthquake in 2010. Uh-huh. One of my best friends from high school went down there. He was working for this philanthropist that gave him X amount of dollars and said, see what good you can do with this money. So he went down to Haiti and was just kind of helping out, like kind of looking for different organizations that he could help. And while he was down there, he came across this orphanage that they had been in Port-au-Prince, but the orphanage had crumbled, and they moved the entire orphanage out to this small little farming community just outside of Port-au-Prince. And they were just kind of squatting in this field, and living. There was 30 kids or so living in a tent, no plumbing, no electricity, which is scary because at that time, they had the cholera outbreak, and it was a bad time to not have all those amenities. And so he finds them, and he's like, wow, I could do so much good with that money here. And so he invested that money, his time, into that orphanage, and he ended up buying the plot of land that they were on, and started building schools, building housing, building a latrine. And so as he was into that process, he called me and our group of friends from high school, and he was like, hey, you guys, you got to be out here. I mean, this will change your life. Come out, like, these kids are amazing, and you could be so much help out here. And so a group of us went down and worked with the kids, and we did a fundraiser, an online fundraiser. A lot of my friends are like tech savvy guys, and so we were helping with building the schools, and just spent like it wasn't much time. It was like a week that first trip, and I just fell in love with the kids, and down there I never really considered doing a painting. I remember thinking, these kids are just beautiful. It'd be great to come down and do some paintings. And the Haitian people in general are just a gifted people. They're just beautiful and athletic and happy and so while I was down there, I did sketches and I'd give them to the kids and keep some of them in my little journal and a few years later I went back and taught some art classes to the kids. I went down. It's actually with a different group. I have a friend that he's a doctor. He goes down. He's a neurologist, and he goes down every few years and teaches. It's kind of like a Doctors Without Borders role that he takes, and he teaches the doctors there about his speciality, which is he emphasizes in seizures and epilepsy. And so, but while he was down there, he started another school with some local Haitians down there. And so I went down and taught at his school, and did a lot of little portrait sketches and Haitian little studies of the Haitian landscape, and brought all that back. And I decided to well, it was first started as one painting, which led to several paintings.
So you ended up doing a show.
Uh-huh.
And the paintings you did were from the drawings.
Uh-huh.
You didn't do any color studies or anything while you were there?
But I did do some color studies.
You did?
Uh-huh.
Okay. How many paintings did you end up with?
So I have quite a few like portrait sketches, but the finished paintings were, I don't know the exact number, 12 to 15 maybe.
Uh-huh. And you did a show?
I did a show.
And was that used as a fundraiser?
Yeah. I was able to send back a little bit of help to them.
Well, you've had a phenomenal experience and a phenomenal education. You had a lot of drawing and a lot of instructors. You ended up at a great school, and you ended up studying under Jacob. Knowing what you know now, what would you change? Or what would you recommend maybe for somebody else as their track?
Like going back, I don't know if I'd change much, just because every experience kind of got me to where I was going. Part of me wants to say I would have gone straight to the atelier and studied with Jacob rather than going to the university. Because I don't want to discredit, because I did learn a lot from my teachers, from some of my teachers.
Well, it's all a
college.
Cumulative effect. You're learning from every place. But if you had to give somebody who might be watching this some advice, who might not have ever been aware of these ateliers or the process, let's start there. If someone is young, they want to learn to draw and paint, they don't have a clue where to begin, what do you recommend to them?
I would recommend going to an atelier first. If you want to go to college and get a degree, degrees are great. They open up a lot of doors. But I think your college degree would be better served if you went to an atelier first and got some, and really learned how to draw and paint, so that you can go to college and then not be struggling to learn those things. Because in college it's so piecemeal. Mm-hmm. It's things like
a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything. Like a lot of those illustration courses that I took, I loved, but it was you would do a 2-week emphasis on gouache, and then a 2-week or maybe a month emphasis on oil, and then pastel, And so you were kind of getting a taste of everything, but not really...
Not a deep dive.
Yeah, not a deep dive.
Well,
so,
and
like
from somebody who's not experienced in that, it might seem appealing to get a couple of weeks of this and a couple of weeks of that, but why is the deep dive important?
Well, it's like, I mean, if you're going to be, in any field, an electrician, a doctor, you need to deeply delve into whatever it is you're going to be. You don't want to, if you're a doctor, you don't want a surface understanding of what you can do in medicine. You want a deep specialization into exactly what you're going to be doing. And so, that's what the atelier is good for, because learning to draw and paint is hard. And it takes those hours and hours and hours.
So the big question I always get has to do with talent. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that there is natural inborn talent, or do you believe that someone who doesn't have that natural inborn talent can become an artist?
Talent always helps, for sure. But I think more important than talent is interest. Mm-hmm. Because, it's like if you're a marathon runner, or you look at these marathon runners and you're like, wow, that's amazing. He runs 10 miles every day to train for this. I could never do that. But that marathon runner loves to run. It's invigorating. He loves putting in that 10 hours a day, even if he's not good at it. It's maybe he's not the fastest guy, but he just loves putting in the time and the work that goes into eventually running the 26 point whatever miles it is in the marathon. Mm-hmm. And so it's like that with art. It's just, if you have that desire, that interest, that yearning to make art, then you can be an artist. Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of people who see these things who are in remote areas of the world who don't have access to be able to either have the time or the money to go to ateliers, or maybe aren't even aware of any that they could find in their areas. If you had to instruct someone on how to learn, obviously they're watching this, mm-hmm. What process do you think is critical for them to follow in terms of learning drawing and then learning painting? If you had your own school, what is the process that you would recommend for them?
So painting from life is pretty important. Just because you're not just or drawing from life. I would start, to answer your question, I'd start with drawing, but I'd make sure that I'm getting a lot of life drawing, because what is really going to be helpful here, or what you need to do is, it's not so much the drawing, but it's the understanding of the form and understanding of what you're seeing that you get from the drawing. And so you're going to get that from drawing from life, and peeking your head around, understand. Even though you're only drawing this portion, I want to know what's over here and over here. So you could peek around this side and peek around this side, and if you're drawing an apple or a cast drawing, or whatever it is. That understanding is so important. So I'd start with drawing.
So most of the ateliers don't start people out drawing from life. They're drawing from real objects. Uh-huh. But most ateliers start out by saying, okay, I guess many of them do the bark drawings, uh-huh. copy the bark drawings, and then they go to plaster casts. Uh-huh. And then from plaster cast they go to life. Is that correct? Or do they start from life in the beginning?
Well, so My education trajectory didn't start with the bargs. I see their value, but I started with the casts. Once I started into my classical education, I started with the casts and painting the figure right from the beginning.
Right. So if you're in the middle of nowhere and you don't have access to much of anything, what are you starting with?
So if I was in the middle of nowhere, I'd probably do what I did. I would be drawing from life, making still lifes and whatnot, drawing that from whatever I could find around the house, something I love, my favorite shoe, or whatever it is, something that's going to hold my interest.
Right. Well, that's really important too, isn't it? You shouldn't be painting or drawing things that don't hold your interest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to have that passion, just like that marathon runner, and then painting from life. I started that even before my classical education. I would paint my friends, and then when my friends would get bored of my company, I would paint myself. So you just or draw myself. So you just use what you have at hand and draw. And if you can't have that, those barg drawings are great. And I guess in one of my illustration class, I remember we had this 100-book notebook that we had to buy, 100-page notebook, and we had to, at the end of the semester, you had to fill up all 100 pages, both sides, with drawings. And so I would draw everything. I would draw from magazines. I would draw my roommates watching TV.
Always be drawing.
Yeah, and so yeah, I would start with drawing.
Well, this has been fascinating. I've loved learning about you and your career path and your educational path. You had a fabulous variety of education, which is fairly unusual, actually, and you kept moving towards different things that were taking you closer and closer to where you wanted to be. I'm fascinated with your work, the quality of your work, and you're certainly becoming a leader in this world of realism and doing phenomenal work. So I congratulate you, and I want to thank you for being here.
No, thank you, Eric, and thanks for all that you do for the art world. You're really moving things along as well.
Thank you.
And getting us out there for people to see.
That's what it's all about. Thanks again.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed Realistic Self-Portraits with Gregory Mortenson, you can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. I'm Eric Rhodes. Keep on painting.
Rembrandt, Sargent, Zorn. Throughout history, the world's finest painters have created self-portraits, which has given us a peek into the past. These have been great gifts from the artists, who have allowed us to see them as they were and to watch them from youth to old age. Self-portraits not only preserved their likeness for future generations, making them immortal, but they were considered an important tool to develop skills in portraiture without the expense of a model. In this all-new exclusive video, you have the rare opportunity to follow along step by step with one of the preeminent masters of portraiture. Gregory Mortenson is a world-famous painter whose work is highly coveted by galleries and museums from New York City to Barcelona. To be one of the rare artists to study under Mortenson is a privilege for very few, and those who want to develop the highest level portraiture skills, which transcend mere portraiture and move to emotional museum quality painting.
Hi, I'm Greg Mortenson, and every year I try and do a self-portrait from life using a mirror. And this year I decided to document my process from the initial graphite block-in all the way to the final pass. And we've documented every form that I turn and every brush stroke that I've laid down. I cover color theory and how I incorporate Munsell, why I set up my palette the way I set up my palette.
This video is the most complete and most in-depth portraiture course ever produced, giving you a level of instruction never before offered on video. Several hours of depth, giving you the understanding of each subtle nuance, which all guide you on the start to finish painting incredible museum-quality portraits. This all-new video is designed for artists of all skill levels who want to paint stunning, lifelike, emotional portraits in the style of the great masters of the past. Realistic Self-Portraits with Gregory Mortenson is now available on DVD and streaming video. Order yours today.